But if you come into intellectual work in that way, I said I believe in the politics of formation, you have to bear and live with what are the consequences of that. You are going to be drawn again and again to the figure of dislocation. It's going to be something which I'm not offering you, now a biographical reason for why I think the things I do. And I'm not saying that that's the only thing that you ought to be thinking about, but there is a good reason why I keep going back to the question of dislocation. There's a good reason why I keep going back to the figure of what I call the detour through thinking. Yeah? Not the straightforward self and the subject, but sidestepping, making the move through theorizing, borrowing the ideas, and coming back to constitute that which cannot be lived as an identity. Can't live yourself as an identity. You can't theorize yourself. I mean, there is no moment to come in which we will be able to live the relations that we are living, if you understand me. We will not be able to do that. We will be able to reflect on them. We'll be able to reconstitute them in thought. We'll be able to analyze them in depth. But we cannot simply live them. That was, one of the illusions of Marxism was precisely that one of these days, after the revolutionary cleavage, ideology would end. We would be able to live the social relations in which we were embedded without reflection, without the mediation of ideology and culture. But I must say, I never believed in that, and it's a hope that I cannot hold out to you. We are therefore endlessly in thought, endlessly in culture. It's just the nature and condition of human life. It's condition of human thinking, not just of intellectual thinking, but of what Gramsci would call the function of the intellectual in everybody. Because, of course, in this sense, intellectuals may have a specialized duty and obligation to think seriously and rigorously, but as Marx once observed, the best and the worst of architects is better than the best of bees, because bees move instinctively. And even the most horrendous architect has to construct an image of the building he's going to build while he's building it. And he's always thinking and reflecting on practice while practicing. And in that sense, everybody is committed to the act of thinking and of thought and of reflection. And there is no way that we can, as it were, close the circle so that we can simply be the conditions which have framed us. We have to reflect on what are the conditions of existence which we have not brought into existence, which have shaped us, which are always already there before we were born, through which we become subjects. It's only through that process of reflecting and representing the world to ourselves as we live it that we become subjects. That is not something which happens in the moment of biological formation. The baby emerges, the separation from the mother takes place, but the formation of a subject takes a very long time. And that fact of separation, which happens in the individual life, but is also a kind of paradigm for all of culture, because the child, in order to become a subject, can no longer simply exist as one with the mother, and has to find in language, in representation, in the subjective strategies of fantasy, whatever, some way of imagining back a connection with that from which it is now fundamentally separated. And that symbolic integument, which, as it were, occupies the space through which the language with which we make a connection with the other whom we cannot be identical with, that necessary space between self and other, is, of course, the birth of culture. It's the birth of language. You know the famous story in Freud about the child who drops the object out of the cot. cannot attract the attention of the mother directly, cannot feed directly from her any longer. That link, connection is ruptured. It must find a language with which to say, hey, I'm hungry. Hey, I'm over here. Hey, I need nurture. Hey, I need attention. The fourth Da game. The mother comes, picks it up. What do you want? I want to attract your attention. This is my first attempt at language. I'm in the domain of symbolization. I'm in the domain where I'm representing my relationship to you. That is the birth of language. But the problem about entering culture in that way is, of course, that you cannot make that language up for yourself. The languages you then enter, as you become a cultural subject, are already there. Somebody else made them. You occupy the traces and the meanings which are already embedded in them. You can only speak by making active again meanings which have already been made. Now, the magic of culture is that what happens then is that this language, which doesn't belong to you, of which you cannot be the author, you can't make it up. You can't make a language from beginning to end. You cannot. It's a private language. You won't communicate. But this language, which you cannot make for yourself, or which you cannot be the author, can, however, be used as you position yourself in it to say the most extraordinary and unique things, to say the things only you could say. So what we think of as our individuality, which is given before culture, which we have as a subject just by being born, and then we, learn to use the tools of culture, is quite the reverse. We enter culture, and by doing so, appropriate a language which someone else, but many other people, have created for us. Men and women make history, but not on the conditions of their own making, with elements which are provided from us from the past, and which in some sense are the conditions of our existence and shape and form us in ways for which we cannot be directly responsible. Nevertheless, within culture, we then can form intentions, make purposes, create the most extraordinary intuitions into life, create, great works of philosophy, of painting, of literature, etc. But only because we are already subjected ourselves to the laws and conventions and meanings of a language which we could not have made ourselves. It's called the decentering of the subject. It's called the dislocation from the position of authorship. It's the dislocation from being that humanist dream, which I think is the humanist fantasy, that actually we made it all. It all proceeds from us, from the origins, from us. I could, say more about that, how that figure of the displacement from the position of origin and identity has recurred in my own thinking. And I don't want to say it's recurred in my thinking because it's recurred in my life, but I don't want to say either that it's recurred in my thinking but has nothing to do with the fact that it's recurred in my life. I think it has something to do with it, but I don't want to think of this as simply a repetition of a pattern formed in my childhood, which, I'm driven, therefore, to think with for the rest of my life. I think those are, that is, as it were, a profound insight. It's some kind of understanding which I've come to, and which, without, it's not my method. I don't, set out and think about a new problem, to think of it not directly, but through the detour. I don't apply it as a method like that. When I think I'm beginning to see what this problem is about, I realize I've done so by making the detour.